Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Nancy Drew. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Obviously, Nancy's doing everything she can to try and get Carson out of jail, but obviously that's not an angle that he's really willing to go down that route for. I mean, I guess it makes sense in the grand scheme of things when he explains, like, well, the Hudsons, Everett in particular, it's his and their word against mine. In fact, the matter is, my fingerprints are on the knife. But Nancy's like, dude, don't try and which I said, dude, like she's not referring to her as ads, dude. Sorry. Don't try and backpedal on your memories, and second guess your memories. Like, the fact of the matter is, we know the Hudsons are involved in this, and it's just, like I said, I thought was interesting because it's like, why are you fighting this? Why aren't you fighting this? And that's what I kept thinking once again, that this had something to do with Nancy's mom, but maybe not, because Nancy had a dream about, first it was her making out with Owen. I'm like, oh, this has to be a dream, and then it's like switches over to Nick, because I thought so, because obviously there was a little bit of a Nancy and Nick thing last episode, like there's something, so I was like, I'm not quite sure if she's going down that, and but it was like her dreaming of Owen and then of Nick, and then like she dreams about, a box underneath the suitcase. Lucy's trying to tell her something, and it's like it's her mom's files, because she was a guidance counselor at the high school, and one of the people she talked to obviously was, Lucy. But even Carson didn't really know the connection. It's like, your mom kept meticulous files. I don't know why it would be gone. I mean, I guess, Everett could have been there, and, because he did drop by my office a lot, so he could have easily have taken him then. But, so that's an angle Nancy's trying to handle. But obviously, trying to help with this whole situation where she goes to Everett. Everett wants help. It is interesting in the long run, though, because even Nancy had brought it up earlier about, like, why is it that, don't you have a whole bunch of hired people? Because Owen's spreading words about, like, everything that went down with the ship and everything, and spreading words that, like, oh, my family was behind all that and stuff like that. But Nancy was like, don't you have plenty of people you hired to do that? And it's like, well, the person he usually hires to handle that stuff is currently in jail, her dad. So, it's almost befitting that he turns to the daughter for help to get her dad out of jail by helping him, so it's like, supposedly probably in his mind, it's like, see, so it's a win-win-win. But at the same time, it's still kind of like, I think it's probably more so like, well, this way you owe me. Like, that way, you're wanting something from me, and this way I don't have to pay you necessarily. But I mean, you're still going to have to grease a few palms to get Carson out of jail. That's why I'm kind of like, I don't know. It seemed like he might have had other motives behind it, but maybe it's just kind of like, well, your dad fixed it, and it's like his only rightful that you be my new fixer while he's kind of away. So obviously she has to decide what she's going to do about this, because obviously she cares about Owen and she doesn't want to betray him, especially because Owen's trying to stop Everett, considering Everett is behind the death of 12 people. We'll find out it's 11, but we'll get to that soon enough. I did like everything that's set up between Lizbeth and Bess. There's a whole conversation about, like, because it's like, obviously she's being welcomed more into the Marvin family. Owen's having her have it, she's having a sit down with her aunt and everything. So that's pretty dope. So it's like she's kind of getting closer to the Marvin family. Obviously she's getting nervous. She even tells Elizabeth where she lives. Obviously that's been kind of like something she's been very nervous about. But she opens up to Elizabeth about the accent and everything, and she drops it, and it's so cool. Like, I got giddy about it, because she's only used her accent, like her natural accent, like twice throughout the entire show. She did it in like a good chunk of one episode, and then partially in the following it. So it was like a little while ago, but it's kind of neat, because once again, if you're unaware, I'm a nut for accents. I always love it when you find out like someone's doing an American accent. I'm like, oh my god, I had no idea you were an American. It's that type of situation, because like this, once again, I've talked about it before. Like, this is the second show I've seen her doing an American, well, at least an English, like a North American accent, in the sense that like she did one that's kind of Odessa and Into the Badlands, and also in this, so being able to hear a natural accent, like I never knew that she was an American in any regard, or at least not even like North American at the very least. So it was just interesting. But I love it. It's also interesting when you hear like the sound of people's voices change, like how different her voice sounds, because you can hear elements of her voice when she's doing a North American accent, just the way she enunciates, but also, the way she, like, you still hear it in her voice. It's almost like, I don't know how to put it. There's a difference in her voice that, like, not just the way she speaks, but it's just like, even like, I don't know if it's her pitch or tone. Her voice, when she's using her natural accent, it seems like her tone is lower, but her pitch seems higher. Like I said, I'm not an expert in vocals or whatever, but it is so distinct and so interesting, and I feel like you notice it from time to time. Like there's certain people, like certain aspects about the way they talk stay the same while other aspects change. She has that, and it's just really interesting, and I like that. And it's really nice that she's showing that to Lizbeth, because Lizbeth's the only other person who knows about her natural accent other than Nancy. So it's like, share it with someone that you really care about. I don't know if she's necessarily dropped that around Nick or George yet. Even in this episode, I don't think she did. So that's interesting. Kind of love when they meet up with Owen again. She's like, oh, by the way, I'm British. And I'm like, I lost my mind about that. I was so giddy about that. But the fact of the matter is, I love that whole talk between Nancy, because she ended up bringing up the whole Owen thing. And it's like, oh, that's so kind of like devious. And like she's kind of super into the whole like, oh, kind of like handling things. It's like, oh, I know exactly where the Marvins are always. And she's like, I'm not a stalker or anything. I mean, she's like, I was just trying to avoid being where they were. So if anything, I'm a reverse stalker, which I love Nancy trying to make her feel better. It's like, well, as someone who kind of like always kind of makes it a habit, kind of know where a lot of people are, it's like, you're kind of in good company. And just like, yeah, to be fair, because Bess is kind of like, yeah, that totally makes sense, because the way you handle things. It was kind of a neat moment. There's even this thing where it seems like Owen's kind of ignoring her calls, and she's like, I'm not disappointed. I mean, I'm just disappointed under the current circumstances. Bess is like, yeah, you keep telling yourself that. But because it's like, oh, I guess he isn't in game. But it's like Owen was avoiding her because he knew that if Nancy found out what he was really up to, then she'd keep digging. Well, he ended up finding the one survivor from the ship, is a dude named Basir. And so you kind of hear his story about what went down, found out it was actually the reason why the ship sank is because there was actually a bomb on board. Obviously, he doesn't want to come forward because he's in the country illegally and he can't go back to his home. Because also he's worried because where he's from, he feels like most people might, they hear that and they might think like, oh, kind of only think bad stuff. So he's in this very complicated situation of he wants to help, he wants to get justice. But then Nancy starts seeing like there's water damage. It's like, where that's from, and Bashir is like, you got to go. And it's like, part of me was wondering, I was like, is Lucy haunting him in some shape or form? I was like, what's up with that? Like, is there some kind of connection between that? But yeah, it turns into this thing of like, because it was this interesting thing where Nancy was like, I'm not trying to betray you or anything, but this is also about getting my dad out. But I did like Owen being like, both you and me are kind of the same way. That the fact of the matter is we both kind of go after we want, even if it means kind of, not hurting the people that we kind of care about. Like, it's just that they are that type of person they are both the same type of person who kind of goes, who's so determined in something, so. Obviously, and there's also the thing with George and Nick, which is interesting, because obviously George is trying to hold on to the restaurant because the lady who owns it, Dawn, wants to sell it because they're just not making enough money. But for George, this isn't just a restaurant. It's not just a job that she uses to support her family. It is that, but also like there's so much to this. Like that restaurant acts as a home away from home. It was more of a home for her than her home, because because obviously like the Fan family and the family, that owns this restaurant, like there's always been history there until like, the Fans actually, I think it was like they caught a lot of like lobster and stuff for this, the business. So it's like they had that type of relationship, but she said her mom kind of screwed that up, which obviously, it seems like it's a combination of probably just like that Fan, like probably like psychic connection thing. Who knows if anyone else in their family has that except for George's mom. Maybe it just hasn't hit George yet, or maybe it never will. Maybe it skips a generation. Whatever the case may be, it seems like it's probably that plus a combination of just kind of not. It seems like probably like, I mean, the way George's mom is kind of a byproduct of the whole being psychically connected. Like, regardless, that's my whole point was I'm wondering, is it just purely on her mom because of just her personal life, or is it more so because now George has a better appreciation for her mom, even though her mom's still kind of a complicated mess in George's book. But nevertheless, her and Nick are trying to like make sure enough money is spent to the restaurant, because like George wants to keep this place, and Nick is offering like, hey, we make it into like a party, make it more into a celebration, get money in, let people know like, hey, summer might not be here, but it's like lobster's kind of full year round, so like come by and everything. And Nick kind of, helps out and everything. And because she had actually talked about the fact that she's marked every table in there. And she was like, all right, Nick, because you've been helping me out, you get to mark one table. And then they're under the table doing it. And then Nancy pops up and he goes, he gets nervous. And even George gets nervous. It's like you weren't doing anything weird, but I think it's because there's definitely like a connection there, and that's really interesting. It's actually sad too because George actually turned to Ryan, but Ryan couldn't really help because of everything he's going through with his family right now, which is like, oh, that would have been a good moment to kind of get back into her good graces, but at the same time, I think Ryan probably did her a benefit because it's like, well, she gotten like legitimately in bed with the Hudsons, it would have been bad, you know. It's like you wouldn't want to get caught up in my family drama anyway, and if I got mixed up in this right now, you'd be kind of caught in the crosshairs of that family drama. And I think in the long run he did her kind of a service in a way. We'll see if that, you know, that's how I'm seeing it, you know. But you know, sadly, you know, Nancy ended up talking to and I say sadly because Nancy's talking to Nick, and you know, he's offering to help with this whole Bashir situation because she's worried. She's like, am I a bad person? When she's like, no, you're like the furthest thing from it. But for her, it's like, if it means saving my dad, I would have to turn Bashir over to Everett. And he's like, but she's like, I would never do that. But he's like, you're calling yourself a bad guy because you're thinking about it. But he's like, yeah, but the fact of the matter is, if I did, it would mean letting Everett get away with killing, you know, 11 other people. But then it's like, and you know, Nick is like, but the fact is, you're even thinking about that. A bad person wouldn't even think about the people that are involved. Wouldn't even think about the ramifications of all of that. You know. So they go to Bashir because they find out, because they end up seeing the haunting firsthand. And it's so interesting. Like, I feel like this is our first instance of them getting dragged into somebody's haunting. That's never happened before. Like, yeah, they've been in the middle of a haunting, but it's usually been because of something they were doing, but never like they've been dragged into someone else's haunting. So I thought that situation was really interesting. But it turns out Bashir is being haunted by the crew from that ship. It happened 3 weeks ago when they basically opened the door. So granted, there's still a lot of ramifications from them opening that doorway. Obviously, that including Simon and now this. Who knows what other spirits and other things they let out that they haven't quite confronted yet. So I thought that was an interesting thing. But by the time Nick got back and everything, you know, George was kind of pissed at him. He was like, you know, let me help out. But she's like, I'm not going to be your next project, because Nick actually ended up, because this is like the last day he had to see his like court-appointed therapist. And, you know, it's like, what do you want for your life, Nick? And for him, it's like, I don't know. And there's the interesting thing of like, well, you can go back to Florida. There's, you know, you could go to Florida, but he's like, I'm not ready to confront my family yet. What was it? I forgot what it was he said his mom does, but he's like, other people in his, well, some people in his family do this. And other people in his family, I forgot what the other job occupation were, like doctors or something like that. So for him, and I'm just the one that spent 2 years in jail. But I liked his therapist being like, if you spend so much time looking in a rearview mirror, kind of like what your past, you get so caught up in the past, you'll just be stuck there and you'll never be able to move forward. You got to find out something that you want for yourself. What do you want? And for Nick, that was the whole thing, because obviously that's what he's still figuring out. Because you can make the argument, I mean, him and Nancy, because like you see Nancy kind of drawn, because even because of the dream, it's like Nick or Owen. But then, like, you see the same thing for Nick, because Nick, like I said, there's something there between him and George. It's like they're friends, but it seems like it's more than just a budding friendship. It seems like it's a budding romance, maybe. We'll see. So that kind of puts everything in a very complicated situation all across the board. But George was mad because for her, it's like, all you do is take on everyone else's issues. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, it's like the moment Nancy asked you to, you just dropped everything. And he's like, yeah, but we need to get to Bashir. It's like, yeah, because it was related to Tiffany's murder, right? That's the thing. You're always taking on other people's stuff, making other people your projects. Find out something. You got all that money, do something with it of your own. And he does. He ends up buying, or at least he's offering to buy the business and stuff like that. George is like, I didn't ask you to buy the business for me. He's like, whoa. I'm not buying it for you. I'll loan you half the money to kind of pay it out. And then, like, you know, when you get the money, you'll pay me back. You know, for him, it's like, because he had talked about it, like he liked what this place represented for George. Because for George, like I said, it was a home away from home. And for Nick, there was nothing in his life that really represented something like that. He had nothing that he could cherish the way she cherished his restaurant. So I think he kind of wanted to kind of have that of his own, kind of like, oh, this can kind of be my thing. This is, you know, something special, you know. So I thought that was beautiful, especially what the business also means to George, and what that in itself makes this place something special that he wants to hold on to as well. And obviously she gives him a knife, like, oh, finish what you started, you know, kind of scrying, you know, carving his name into one of the tables. So I thought that was nice. But like I said, it brings up some interesting elements of that said budding romance. So now, while all this, you know, is happening, you know, Bashir ended up giving Nancy and Nick, like, what was like remnants of the bomb. And so it's like, okay, so now Nancy's in the position of, okay, so what does she do? There's a whole thing with Bess, who met with her aunt, and there's a whole conversations about like, oh, like what Bess could do in the Marvin family, like business stuff like that, kind of teaching her like the Marvin way. It's like, oh, you have the certain Marvin lifestyle. I was actually nervous. I was like, are you gonna hint that like? But it's like, no. Like Bess being, you know, into girls, it's like good. I was like, all right, thank God, like that's not an issue. But it turns into a thing of like, well, your girlfriend Lizbeth is a driver. It's fine to have fun, but you can't marry someone. It's kind of a social status thing of like, we're high hoity-toity type of, you know, social status BS. But they were even being like, oh, I want you to meet with someone named Amaya. But obviously she had, even I was like, oh, you're trying to hook her up, you know? But then she brought up Lisbeth. I was like, oh, so you know she's dating someone. But it's like, okay, it's kind of like you can have your fun, whether it's with a pool boy, like girl, like whoever, like, because it seems like her mom had her fun too. And it's like, but I guess her mom ended up being with someone that the family didn't agree with, that being Bess's dad, which I don't know if she's ever talked about her dad at all. Maybe she doesn't really know, you know, but or maybe that was at least one of the issues that kind of was a thing of like being a part of the Marvin family is sadly like they kind of dictate so much of your life because you're supposed to fit this certain mold or whatever. So I would say it's like almost, but they're like, oh, but this Amaya girl, like you don't, anything has to happen. She could just be a mentor or whatever. But it almost seemed like they were kind of setting you up to kind of be like almost like an arranged marriage of maybe not, but it's kind of like, oh, if you hit it off, you hit it off. But maybe she could just be a mentor to you. So there's that side of things. But there's a little dinner, and it's just this awkward dinner. Well, because I skipped over it, but Nancy went to talk to Ryan because Ryan could be like, well, it's like, I got to know whether I can trust your dad or not. And it's like, well, the fact of the matter is, why would my dad trust a dropout? And she's like, I didn't drop out. I didn't apply. It's different. I love that she had to make that point clear. But the fact of the matter is, I thought was kind of fascinating was, well, when that's all said and done, like, that did beg the point of like, why did Everett go through so much trouble to get her to do it? Why not hire someone else to do it? Because like you have the resources to kind of dig up your own dirt. So why use Nancy for this? Well, you know, maybe he was trying to give her a test to see whether she could be useful in the future, considering her detective skills. Maybe not. I don't really know what to kind of make of that. But obviously Lisbeth was there listening to the conversation. Obviously they don't know about her being like, oh, we'll get to that soon enough. But it was kind of this awkward dinner between the Marvins and the Hudsons. And it's just turned into this whole thing of like, oh, you did this and you did that. You're responsible for the murders. You know, and it's like, oh, the fact of the matter is, if you try to take us down, the Marvins have enough skeletons in their closet. It's a mutual assured destruction. Nancy shows up and it's like, hey, I'm making this deal. And Owen's like, yo, what the hell, Nancy? Basically, and it's like, I was like, oh man, this is good. I was like, I know Nancy's got a plan, but I was like, you didn't let Owen know. Later on, we find out, oh, Owen was just acting along. So that's interesting. But yeah, Lisbeth comes in and I love Ryan being like, you're a cop? And it's like, yeah, I think it's called an undercover sting. And so Everett's getting taken down because the money he was putting into that account was the cop's account, and now they can arrest him for all of this. Because even, I think it was because Owen had thrown it out there. It's like, oh, he killed my Uncle Sebastian because of or was it the aunt who had said like, oh, because you were having a thing with him, Sebastian. And then Ryan's hearing this for the first time because it's like, right, Nancy found out because she knows that Lucy found out that secret, but Ryan never knew this. And now he's like, wait, Mom? So there's that type of thing. Everett being arrested. His mom, Ryan's mom still be kind of loyal because they're like, well, he's the head of the family. But Ryan's like, well, I got some of that stuff from the ship. So Dad, he's going down. And it's like, okay. She's like, you wouldn't. He's like, I think it's time for this family to move back in. This family's been drifting in a different direction. It's time for me to be at the helms. What that means necessarily, I don't know. I knew that him taking all that stuff was going to be for the purpose of kind of putting himself in a better position. Now, once again, whether that's a good thing or bad thing, like obviously he hasn't really done any good with it so far. I mean, he hasn't done any bad with it necessarily, but like he's putting himself in a more favorable position. He wasn't all that keen about taking down his dad, but I figured it was him trying to blackmail his dad, maybe. It's kind of the plan, but it seems like that's kind of no longer an option now that he's kind of been arrested, whatever the case may be. So I'm curious to see where things kind of go on that front. The complicated relationship between Lisbeth and Bess, simply because she has her obligations as a Marvin. Because at first the phone was ringing, she's like, "Oh, get it." They didn't focus on it. I was like, "Why would she be ignored?" I was like, "Right." She was supposed to have that dinner date, right? And we see later on that it was a dinner date thing with Amaya. It's like, or rather, it was an appointment being like, yo, Owen being like, yo, you're going to meet up with her tomorrow and everything. So now she's going to be in this position because obviously, like, Lisbeth is like, I'm falling in love with you. And the same thing, Bess is feeling the same. I'm like, love is in the air. But then it turns into the thing of like, now she's in that, like I said, that complicated thing. I was like, well, she's not, well, the thing is, she's not a driver, she's a police officer. But I'm sure it's still going to be the thing of the Marvins being like, it's for a particular purpose of like, you're supposed to fit this social thing. And dating a cop isn't, once they looked at her being potential Elizabeth as a driver being kind of like probably like a lower scale job, but it's like they probably think the same thing of her even being a police officer. Like I said, we'll see. Maybe they'll change their tone, but I think it's just kind of like that complicated world. I think Bess is going to find herself in of like she's been living in this world for a while, and now it's like, oh, and maybe she had brought that up previously. I didn't know her green card status was the complicated thing that it is too, because her green card or her visa ran out like a couple months ago, so she's here illegally. But the Marvins are going to handle that, so benefits, but comes with its complications as well. That obviously plays into the whole Nancy thing too, because her and Owen, and him being like, we're both kind of the same. We go for what we get, what we want. But now it's like, well, what, at the end of the day, what is it that Nancy wants? And Owen's like, is it about Nick? And she's like, it isn't always about a guy. I think this is about the investigation, because she ended up finding Lucy's files from her mom's files in that painting, because she had saw it earlier and blood was dripping from it, but now it kind of made more sense, because it turns out Everett had stolen them. Maybe not Everett, maybe it was someone else, but maybe Everett. But because I'm thinking like, because obviously like his wife is a lot more involved in this than it seemed like. It seems like Everett made a lot of moves on his own, but the fact of the matter is his wife is just as involved. She's just as invested as keeping things, because like his future being jeopardizes her own future and status. So it's more of self-preservation, I think. But regardless, Nancy's talking more to her dad, and he's like, you shouldn't have done it because now Everett's going to come after her. And she's like, that's kind of the point. Now it's going to force you. You might not want to kind of look after yourself, but you're my dad, so you're going to look after me. It's like, I'm not putting my life in my own hands. I'm putting my life in your hands. It's because it's like, you're my dad, and I love you, and I need you here, So Carson is willing to fight more so now. He's like, I got some stuff that can be used against the Hudsons. It's not, anything definitive, but it's enough, skeletons in the closet that he can use against him. So we'll see. But then Nancy ends up reading some stuff from Lucy in her mom's files, and it turns out it's like, oh, some stuff about if I die, it's going to be my mom's fault. So it's like, okay. Because we met wasn't her half-brother, I think? The dude that Nick works with, like the mechanic, like that was her half brother. So obviously, like that's been inside of things we haven't really touched on too much. Is like, because obviously a lot of the investigation has been about Tiffany, because Tiffany and Lucy, there's a connection there. You kind of solve one, you solve the other. It's kind of what has been seeming, but now it seems like there might be some divergence in that, but maybe not. But we haven't really dived deeply into the whole Lucy situation. So I'm interested to kind of dive into like why she would even say that, like what issues did she have with her family, But at the same time, Ryan's mom is setting up basically a hit against Carson. Like I said, it's because she can't have Carson talking too much, because it's also meant to be not only a message to Carson by getting rid of him, but it's also meant to be a message to Nancy of like, don't get involved in our stuff. So that's the complicated thing that Nancy was dealing with last episode, when she kind of gets other people involved in certain things. When she kind of investigates, other people get caught up in the crossfire. So, but we'll see how all this ends up turning out going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.